Gentlemen, it's Aaron Bulma here. Serving as military specialist for Carleton County, I am going to give you the next presentation on the World War II timeline. Actually, I've talked about Moscow, the Battle of Moscow, and I've talked about Army Group North, of course, Barbarossa at the start, um, Army Group North going, marching to Leningrad, and then, of course, the Finnish contribution to that and of course talked about the center march on Moscow. And then, of course, ones I've got coming up are the Battle of Kharkov, the first Battle of Kharkov, and then the first Battle of Rostov on Don. So I'm going to go back just a bit and talk a bit about the Battle of Kiev, which is before it sets off the Battle of Moscow. But I'm going a little bit back a bit, and I probably should have done the first Battle of Kiev first. But this is the big because um, I thought I could get past it and then talk directly about Moscow and then go down to Rostov on Don. But then I realized I think I'm going to do a bit more, just touch up on Kiev, because then I'm going to talk about um, Army Group South and the push to the Caucasus. That's Rostov on Don and whatnot, and that's going to be at a later date. And there's definitely some significance of the Battle of Kiev. It's certainly not as massive as the Battle of Moscow and then Stalingrad and whatnot, but this is certainly one of the largest military encirclements in history, and certainly with the encirclement of 600,000 Soviet troops, it really justifies talking about it about as far as the Eastern Front goes. Certainly, when you look at this, you look at the map, Army Group Center through Smolensk to Moscow, Army Group North, Leningrad, and Pulpus, and of course, Army Group Center, so here going to Moscow, and Army Group South going to Kiev, right? And so you have the push on Kiev, and then Kharkov, and then the Don, the Rostov on Don, and then eventually Stalingrad. That's which starts in 1942. They reach the outskirts of Stalingrad. So it is um, do it trying to do it by north, center, and then south. And of course, they help each other. Each of these army groups are helping each other too. They're sometimes they'll have to have more support from center or and so on and so forth through these campaigns. So the first Battle of Kiev was the German name for the operation that resulted in a very large encirclement of Soviet troops in that vicinity of the city. It is considered the largest encirclement of troops in history. The operation ran from the 23rd of August to the 26th of September 1941 as part of Operation Barbarossa, of course. In Soviet military history, it is referred to as the Kiev Defensive Operation, with somewhat different dating of 7th of July to the 26th of September 1941. Um, Much of the southwestern front of the Red Army, Mikhail Karponos, was encircled, but small groups of Red Army troops managed to escape the cauldron, and that's coming from him. Um, the days after the German pincers met east of the city, including the headquarters of Marshal Semyon Budyani, Marshal Semyon Timoshenko, and Commissar Nikita Khrushchev. And Nikita Khrushchev plays a big part, of course, in Battle of Stalingrad as well. Karponos was trapped behind German lines and killed while trying to break out. So much of that force, the 600,000 troops, impressive, and they're either killed or captured. The ones captured are marched. They're marched west back. Many back into Germany. Many are killed. Many are sent to concentration camps, as treated just as were the Jews, and many were even there's mass executions of Soviet prisoners of war as well. The battle was it was unprecedented defeat for the Red Army, exceeding even the Battle of Bialystok, Minsk of June and July 1941. Massive, um, massive, of course, encirclements there too. Is the lightning warfare. The Blitz started in June 22nd, 1941. Um, so June and July, that was the Battle of Minsk, and I could have covered that more. I did mention it, I believe. Um, the encirclement trapped 452,700 soldiers, 2,642 guns and mortars, and 64 tanks, of which scarcely 15,000 escaped from the encirclement by 2nd of October. The Southwestern Front suffered 700,544 casualties, including 616,000 killed, 616,304 killed, captured, or missing during the battle. The 5th, 37th, 26th, 21st, and the 38th Armies, consisting of the 43 divisions, were almost annihilated, and the 40th Army suffered many losses. Incredible carnage and destruction to the Red Army, and of course, this was a major success for the Wehrmacht. Like the Western Front before it, the Southwestern Front had to be recreated almost from scratch. Here is a map of the Battle of this here, Battle of Kiev in the encirclement. Here's another more complicated map of the German advance through here and pushing and encircling the city of Kiev, and then pushing onward down through the Caucasus. Hitler wanted to do this quickly. He wanted to do this within 6 months, get down to the Caucasus to get to the oil fields, as fresh, full supply of oil, and which would ensure their victory in the West. So what they were hoping to do is crush Great Britain, and if America was to start something, they'd deal with America. So, and this is the Eastern Front as far as we see it at that point. September, and then going in. So it's amazing. June 22nd, all through summer and going into September, that entire area has been taken. The Germans at this point have really known only success. The Red Army has been able to slow them down at certain points, but of course, certainly the encirclement of Leningrad shows a stalemate actions there. It shows, and certainly what we're going to see and what I've talked about in Moscow, the Battle of Moscow, which I've already talked about. That was, during that winter, stopping them dead cold. That was a first. After the rapid progress of Army Group Center through the central sector of the Eastern Front, a huge salient developed around its junction with Army Group South by late July 1941. A substantial Soviet force, nearly the entire Southwestern Front, positioned in and around Kiev, was located in this salient. So the salient, as you can see here, is pushing inward around, and the salient has the Soviets surrounded. While lacking mobility and armor due to high losses in tanks at the Battle of Uman, they nonetheless posed a significant threat to the German advance and were the largest single concentration of Soviet troops on the Eastern Front at that time. So they had to get around, and they had to cut off their supply lines, and they had to stop their ability to retreat, because they know they would have to face them sooner rather than later in the coming days. Those troops could have retreated back up to Moscow, to other sectors, Rostov. So on August 3rd, Hitler temporarily canceled the drive on Moscow in favor of driving south and attacking Kiev in Ukraine. So this is why So they had to. It was temporarily held. So of course they needed the help from Army Group Center and of course Army Group South to try to respectively push in and take Kiev as a bastion. And it was a big kick in the teeth for the Soviets. And in favor of driving south and attacking in Ukraine, this here led to the possibility of attacking Moscow and pushing forward into Moscow as well, as the momentum of the Soviet retreat took further hold. However, on August 12th, 1941, supplement to Directive number 34 was issued, and it represented a compromise between Hitler, who was convinced the correct strategy was to clear the salient occupied by Soviet forces on the right flank of Army Group Center in the vicinity of Kiev before resuming the drive to Moscow. He didn't, of course. Hitler wanted to continue to push forward, and Halder. So the compromise between Hitler and Halder, Bach, Fyodor von Bach, and Hans Guderian, who advocated an advance on Moscow as soon as possible. So, and of course, Hitler wanted to take out Kiev first. The compromise required second and third Panzer groups of Army Group Center, which were redeployed in order to aid Army Group North and Army Group South, respectively. And they would be returned to Army Group Center altogether with the 4th Panzer Group of Army Group North once their objectives were achieved, and they were achieved. Um, then the 3 Panzer Groups under the control of Army Group Center will lead the advance on Moscow, and that's what they did. Initially, Halder, Chief of Staff of the OKH, and Buck, Fyodor von Buck, commander of Army Group Center, were satisfied by the compromise. So they would use forces, bring them down to attack Kiev. Once that was over, they would head back up north and assist within the Moscow offensive. So they were satisfied with the compromise, but soon their optimism faded as the operational realities of the plan proved too challenging. Hitler was really trying to push for moving units around and then push up north after that. On the 18th of August, OKH submitted a strategic survey, Durchjeff, to Hitler regarding the continuation of operations in the east. The paper made the case for the drive to Moscow, arguing once again, and that's what the generals wanted to continue to drive on Moscow. Um, Arguing once again that Army Groups North and South were strong enough to accomplish their objective without any assistance from Army Group Center, pointing out that there was only enough time left before winter to conduct a single decisive operation against Moscow. And they realized that. And they realized that, there's, 4 months. We have to get in there 3 months, before by November it's really getting cold in Russia, and it's getting cold in and around Moscow, and it shows. I mean, certainly talking about the Battle of Moscow. In my other presentations, I've talked about the freezing soldiers and the thousands of deaths just by hypothermia, um, and the surrounding Moscow, but not being able to take it. And certainly, um, Halder and Hans Guderian and the generals knew that if they did not take the opportunity, it could get we might lose that opportunity. He wanted to, but Hitler wanted to take Kiev first. He wanted to see other objectives. He had his own visions, of course. Guderian, this is Hans Guderian at a forward command post for one of his panzer regiments near Kiev in 1941. So the Red Army's loss of resources after this battle made it hard for them to recover. It was a real, it was, and they were in a world of hurt before that, and then after that, certainly more so. more than 400 tanks have been destroyed, as well as 343 aircraft and nearly 30,000 guns and mortars. An impressive loss in over 600,000 men. On the 20th of August, Hitler rejected the proposal as his priority was to deprive the Soviets of their industrial areas and capture it for Germany. On 21st of August, Jody of OKH issued a directive which summarized Hitler's instructions to Brauchitsch, commander of the army. The paper reiterated that the most important missions before the onset of winter are to seize the Crimea and the industrial and coal region of the Don, deprive the Russians of the opportunity to obtain oil from the Caucasus, and in the north to encircle Leningrad and link up with the Finns, and that's the encirclement of Leningrad. Among other instructions, it also instructed that Army Group Center is to allocate sufficient forces to ensure the destruction of the Russian Fifth Army, and at that same time to prepare to repel enemy counterattacks in the central sector of its front. Hitler referred to the Soviet forces in the salient collectively as the Russian Fifth Army. Halder was dismayed and later described Hitler's plan as utopian and unacceptable, concluding that the orders were contradictory and Hitler alone must bear the responsibility for inconsistency of his orders, and that OKH can no longer assume responsibility for what was occurring. However, Hitler's instructions still accurately reflected the original intent of the Barbarossa Directive, of which the OKH, which is the Wehrmacht Headquarters Command, was aware of all along. General Engel, in his diary for the 21st of August 1941, simply summarized it as, "It was a black day for the army." Halder offered his own resignation and advised Brauchitsch to do the same. However, Brauchitsch declined, stating Hitler would not accept the gesture, and nothing would change anyhow. Halder withdrew his offer for resignation. On the 23rd of August, Halder convened with Friedrich von Bock, and Hans Guderian in Borisov, in Belorussia, and afterwards flew with Guderian to Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. During a meeting between Guderian and Hitler, with neither Halder nor Brauchitsch present, Hitler allowed Guderian to make the case for driving on Moscow, and then rejected his argument. Hitler claimed his decision to secure the northern and southern sectors of Western Soviet Union were tasks which stripped the Moscow problem of much of its significance and was not a new proposition, but a fact I have clearly and unequivocally stated since the beginning of the operation. Hitler also argued that the situation was also more critical because the opportunity to encircle the Soviet forces in the salient was an unexpected opportunity and a reprieve from past failures to trap the Soviet armies in the south. Hitler also declared the objectives that time will be lost and the offensive on Moscow might be undertaken too late, or that the armored units might no longer be technically able to fulfill their mission, are not valid. So he doesn't believe they're valid in not having the time. Hitler reiterated that once the flanks of Army Group Center were cleared, especially the salient in the south, then he would allow the army to resume its drive on Moscow, an offensive, he concluded, which must not fail. In point of fact, Hitler had already issued the orders for the shift of Guderian's panzer group to the south. Guderian returned to his panzer group and began the southern thrust in an effort to encircle the Soviet forces in the salient. The bulk of the 2nd Panzer Group and the 2nd Army were detached from Army Group Center and sent south. Its mission was to encircle the southwestern front, commanded by Bodiani, in conjunction with the 1st Panzer Group of Army Group South under von Kleist. which was driving up from a southeasterly direction. The Panzer armies made rapid progress. On the 12th of September, Kleist's 1st Panzer Group, which had by now turned north and crossed the Dnieper River, emerging from its bridgeheads at Cherkasy and Kremenchug, continued north. It cut across the rear of Budyonny's southwestern front, General Budyonny's front, Russian. On 16th September, it made contact with Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group, advancing south. At the town of Lokchetsky, 120 miles behind Kiev, Budyonny was now trapped and soon relieved by Stalin's order of the 13th of September. No successor was named, leaving the troops to their individual corps and division commanders. After that, the fate of the encircled Russian armies was sealed. With no mobile forces or supreme commander left, there was no possibility to effect a breakout. The infantry of the German 17th Army and 6th Army of Army Group South soon arrived, along with the 2nd Army, also on loan from Army Group Center, and marching behind Guderian's tanks. They systematically began to reduce the pocket, assisted by the two Panzer armies. The encircled Soviet armies at Kiev did not give up easily. A savage battle in which the Soviets were bombarded by artillery, tanks, and aircraft had to be fought before the pocket was overcome. By the 19th of September, Kiev had fallen, but the encirclement battle continued. After 10 days of heavy fighting, the last remnants of troops east of Kiev surrendered on the 26th of September. The Germans claimed 600,000 Red Army soldiers captured. Over that, actually. Although these claims have included a large number of civilians suspected of evading capture. Hitler called it the greatest battle in history. It's possible that this battle subtly impacted on the course of the war. If Hitler had not rejected the advice of all of his generals and had proceeded to take Moscow instead, maybe history would have been different. The Germans might have won this battle, but their delay in taking Moscow was fatal. And that's why it is more notable in that context of the Eastern Front. This opinion is borne out by one of the German commanders who commented after World War II was over, that going for Kiev first was a huge mistake. Choosing Kiev meant that Operation Typhoon was delayed until October. And you only have 2-3 months. And he said that if they had gone for Moscow first, they would have been able to capture the city before the cold Russian winter set in. It was certainly a mistake on Hitler's part as far as underestimating the Soviet winter months. This is a German sentinel, the German sentinel in the citadel of Kiev on the 19th of September. By virtue of Guderian's southward turn, the Wehrmacht destroyed the entire southwestern front east of Kiev during September, inflicting over 600,000 losses of the Red Army, while Soviet forces west of Moscow conducted a futile and costly offensive against German forces around Smolensk. After this Kiev diversion, Hitler launched Operation Typhoon in October, and I talked about that in great detail about Operation Typhoon, only to see his offensive falter at the gates of Moscow in early December. Some claim that Hitler launched Operation Typhoon in September. If he had done that in September rather than October, the Wehrmacht would have avoided the terrible weather, and certainly that is true. This is clearly not the case in some contexts, as debated by other historians. Historian Glatz argues that had Hitler launched Operation Typhoon in September, Army Group Center would have had to penetrate deep Soviet defenses, manned by a force that had not squandered its strength in fruitless offensives. against German positions east of Smolensk. And so those troops would have come up to defend Moscow if he had not taken Kiev and encircled them there. That is true. Furthermore, Army Group Center would have launched its offensives with an ever extending and vulnerable right flank, and in the back, and the best reckoning would have reached the gates of Moscow after mid October, just as the fall rainy season was beginning. Eventually, Stavka saved Moscow by raising and fielding 10 reserve armies that took part in the final defenses of the city in December 1941 and counterattacks 1942. So you can see it's an endless disaster at this point for the Red Army right now. Um, as a result of these failing offensives, the Red Army formations defending Moscow were seriously weakened, of course, and talking about Moscow. Um, with its southern flank secured, Army Group Center launched Operation Typhoon, and certainly Red Army formations um, certainly weakened. And then, of course, now over objections of Gerd von Rundstedt, Army Group South was ordered to resume the offensive and overrun nearly all of the Crimea and left bank Ukraine before reaching the edges of the Donbass industrial region. However, after 4 months of continuous operations, his forces were at the brink of exhaustion and suffered a major defeat at the Battle of Rostov. So, and I'll talk about the Battle of Rostov in the coming days. I'll have that one up and that presentation up and going. Army Group South's infantry fared little better and failed to capture the vital city of Kharkov before nearly all of its factories, skilled laborers, and equipment were evacuated east of the Ural Mountains. Uh, the next presentation I'm going to do is on the Battle of Kharkov, explaining some of that. Um, so, explaining things, of course, if Hitler had not taken Kiev, those troops would have been able to supply Moscow with even more soldiers, but in other areas, certainly areas around that, they would have been a much bigger problem for the Germans. But of course, Hitler decides to take Kiev, and then, of course, that wastes a lot of time before the winter months, and his window certainly has closed far too much when they begin that operation in October, Operation Typhoon, to take Moscow. So even though those 600,000, big kick to the Red Army, they were not able to help defend Moscow. It was too late to attack Moscow, and it did explain some of this in the Moscow presentation. Immediately after the Second World War ended, prominent German commanders argued that had operations at Kiev been delayed and had Operation Typhoon been launched in September rather than October, the Wehrmacht would have reached and captured Moscow before the onset of winter, and they might have won even with the 10 reserve armies around Moscow. The winter really had saved um, the stopped the offensive. It has actually froze the offensive in a certain extent. Hans Guderian and Friedrich von Bock, in particular, fiercely argued that the diversion to Kiev would have dire consequences if the operation dragged on for too long. Winter was coming in a few weeks. Um, it starts early. Russia has a very long winter season, especially up northern sectors, even in central sectors, such as Moscow. And if Moscow was not taken before the first snow, the entire operation would bog down in the mud, as it was historically, um, and it did. However, David Glantz, a historian, argued that had Operation Typhoon been launched in September, it would have met greater resistance due to Soviet forces not having been weakened by their offensives east of Smolensk. Right. So, and then, of course, and that's again talking about Kiev and the massive Soviet troop movements in Kiev and what they were able to possibly do to hinder the German offensive. The offensive would have also been launched with an extended right flank. Glantz and that been more German power. Glantz also claims that regardless of the final position of German troops when winter came, they would have still faced a counteroffensive by 10 reserve armies raised by the Soviets toward the end of the year, who would also be better equipped by the vast industrial resources in the area of Kiev. Glantz asserts that had Kiev not been taken before the Battle of Moscow, the entire operation would have ended in disaster for the Germans, but it still did, due to lack of winter gear, due to lack of time, and of course, even taking out the 600,000, the Germans were still bogged down. Babi Yar. Another significant aspect of the Battle of Kiev and the aftermath is the start of the final solution against the Jews has already begun at this point with Einsatzgruppen's SS death squads, actually SD, 3,000, only 3,000 men in total, roughly. These guys are going around village to village to village behind the Wehrmacht in their advance and rounding up Jews, entire villages, commissars, communists, Jews, and other minorities, Romani people as well, and executing them. Mass executions with pits. Babi Yar is one of the worst, largest. Babi Yar is a ravine in the Ukrainian capital of Kiev, outside of Kiev, and a site of a series of massacres carried out by the Nazis. And the most notorious and the best documented of these massacres took place on the September 29th and 30th, 1941, after Kiev was captured, wherein 33,771 Jews were killed in a single operation. The decision to kill all the Jews in Kiev was made by the military governor, Major General Kurt Eberhard, the police commander for Army Group South, SS Obergruppenführer Friedrich Jeckelin, and the Einsatzgruppen C commander Otto Rasch. Sorry. It was carried out by Sonderkommando 4A soldiers, along with the aid of the SD and SS police battalions, backed by the local police and Romanian. There was of course, the Romanian help with the Romanian militia squads and local police forces had assisted in this mass killing. The massacre was the largest single mass killing for which the Nazi regime and its collaborators were responsible during its campaign against the Soviet Union, and is considered to be the largest single massacre in the history of the Holocaust. To that particular date, surpassed only by the Aktion Urteilsfest of November 1943, with 42,000 to 43,000 victims, and the 1941 Odessa massacre of more than 50,000 Jews in October 1941, and that was committed by Romanian troops. So, though this is certainly the largest one in Ukraine, Einsatzgruppen A, B, C, and D. A pushing up with Army Group North. B pushing behind Army Group Center. C and D are southern sectors, and of course Einsatzgruppen C is with Army Group South, but could also work in with areas in Army Group Center. A, B, C, and D have committed over 100,000, 150,000 massacres. More than that. Not sure the exact figure right now, but massive death toll. Insurmountable. Up to hundreds of thousands, maybe up to a million by war's end, by that area alone. And of course, um, consider it 2 million, looking up into further data, um, up to 2 million or over that, if you can imagine the carnage. And of course, this is before the actual switching to gas vans, and then eventually, of course, Operation Reinhard, um, Reinhardt, and that would be, of course, Sobibor, Treblinka, and Majdanek, and of course Auschwitz with the mass gas chambers, and that was started in um, 41 and then 42, and that was an ongoing operation. Um, of course, this is the what was leading to this was decided. The full gassing in the development was uh, finally, of course, in early 1942 with the Wannsee Conference deciding on what they call the final solution of the Jewish question. This all was part of that, a small part of many different tragedies that had happened during this time period. Here is Babi Yar. You have Sonderkommandos in units digging in the ravine, getting ready for what will happen. Um, so, interesting scene, completely morbid and horrible, certainly. Um, Another terrible photograph. Victims of other massacres at the site included thousands of Soviet POWs, which were treated just as communists in, of course, Slavs were treated as almost as like subhuman. Slavs were not treated very well, of course, viewed in the eyes of the Germans, as well as many thousands of Soviet POWs killed, hundreds of thousands. Um, but this site, another massacres, POWs, communists, gypsies, Romanian people, any Ukrainian nationalists that were proud to be Ukrainians were executed, or if they were found, and civilian hostages. It is estimated between 100,000 to 150,000 lives were taken at Babi Yar during the German occupation. Now, that's during the entire German occupation, but those first few days, 33,771, that continued on for 3 days straight. So that now in other reports there were 3 days straight, but of course the two massacres of the largest massacres, the 29th and the 30th of September 1941, Axis forces, mainly German, occupied Kiev on the 19th of September. On September 26, Major General Kurt Eberhard, the military governor and SS Obergruppenführer Friedrich Jacqueline and SS and police leader, and the SS and police leader at Rear Headquarters Army Group South made the decision to exterminate the Jews of Kiev, claiming that it was in retaliation for guerrilla attacks against German troops. ISIS Group C carried out the Babi Yar massacre and a number of other mass atrocities in Ukraine during the summer and autumn of 1941. Its commander, SS Brigade Führer der Otto Rascht, and the officer commanding Sonderkommando 4A SS Standartenführer Paul Blobel were at the September 26th meeting as well. An order was then posted in the town, Oliyids of the city of Kiev and in its vicinity must appear on Monday, September 29th by 8 a.m. at the corner of Milenkova and Doktrovska Streets near cemetery. must take with them documents, money, valuables, also warm clothing, linen, etc. Those of Yids who won't follow this order will be found in other place, will be shot. Those civilians who entered the dwellings left by Yids and plunder stuff will be shot. So if they go in to dwellings of Jews um, and steal stuff, they will be shot as well. And that's actually the what's in the paper, and that's what's posted. Now that order was posted in Kiev in Russian on or around September 26, 1941. And this is some of the result. On the 29th and 30th September 1941, a special team of German SS troops, supported by other German units and local collaborators, murdered the 33,771 Jewish civilians after taking them to the ravine. The implementation of the order was entrusted to Sonderkommando 4A, commanded by Blobel, under the general command of Friedrich Jeckeln. This unit consisted of SD and SIPO, the 3rd Company of the Special Duties Waffen SS Battalion, and a platoon of the 9th Police Battalion. Police Battalion 45, commanded by Major Besser, conducted the massacre, supported by members of the Waffen SS Battalion. According to the testimony of a truck driver named Hofer, victims were ordered to undress and were beaten if they resisted. He says, I watched what happened when the Jews, men and women and children, arrived. The Ukrainians led them past a number of different places where one after the other they had to give up their luggage, then their coats, shoes, and overgarments, and also underwear. They also had to leave their valuables in a designated place. There was a special pile for each article of clothing. It all happened very quickly, and anyone who hesitated was kicked or pushed by the Ukrainians to keep them moving. Michael Bunderblom. A statement of truck driver Hofer described the murder of the Jews at Babi. And that's another photo here of the terrible atrocities. This is actually the worst photo of them I found. The crowd was large enough that most of the men and women and children could not have known what was happening until it was too late. By the time they heard the machine gun fire, there was no chance to escape. All were driven down a corridor of soldiers in groups of 10 and then shot. A truck driver described the scene. Once undressed, they were led to the ravine, which was about 150 meters long and 30 meters wide, and a good 15 meters deep. When they reached the bottom of the ravine, they were seized by members of the Schutzpolizei and made to lie down on top of Jews who had already been shot. The sardine can theory. The corpses were literally in layers. A police marksman came along and shot each Jew in the neck with a submachine gun. I saw these marksmen stand on layers of corpses and shot one after the other. The marksman would walk across the bodies of the executed Jews to the next Jew, who had meanwhile laid down and shot him. In the evening, the Germans undermined the wall of the ravine and buried the people under the thick layers of earth. According to the Encirclement Operational Situation Report, the 33,771 Jews from Kiev and its suburbs were systematically shot dead by machine gun fire at Babi on the 29th and 30th of September 1941. The money, valuables, underwear, and clothing of the murdered were turned over to the local ethnic Germans and to the Nazi administration of the city. Wounded victims were buried alive in the ravine along with the rest of the bodies. In the months that followed, thousands more were seized and taken to Babi, where they were shot. It is estimated that more than 100,000 residents of Kiev, of all ethnic groups, mostly civilians, were murdered by the Nazis during the Second World War. A concentration camp was also built in the area. Mass executions at Babi continued until the Nazis evacuated the city of Kiev. On the 10th of January 1942, about 100 captured Soviet sailors were executed there after being forced to disinter and cremate the bodies of previous victims. In addition to that, Babi Yar became a place of execution of residents of 5 gypsy camps. Patents of the patients of the Ivan Pavlov Psychiatric Hospital were gassed and then dumped into the ravine. Thousands of other Ukrainians were killed at Babi Yar. Among those murdered were 621 members of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. The Ukrainian poet and activist Olena Taliha, and her husband, and renowned banderist Mikhailo Taliha were murdered there, and that was in 42. So it's certainly, this is just, and in the camps, you can see are the gypsy camps, different, and this is all part of the massive web of the final solution. And this is only, unfortunately, and as we all know, the most terrible and most well documented crime in history, one of the most terrible crimes in history, and one of the most well documented, um, if not the most well documented crime in history. This is only a small part of that. Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Aaron Boma, military specialist for Carleton County.